I am Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is over.
A syndicated science fiction series with the ambitions of the next generation needed a way to stretch its budget, and one of the production's best-kept secrets was just how much of its physical world was reused rather than built from scratch. Props, set pieces, and models from the original series and the feature films were repurposed wherever possible. The transporter room is one of the most visible examples. The circular glass illumination panels that had lit the transporter pads in the 1960s series were removed from their original mounting, flipped, and reinstalled in the ceiling of the next generation's transporter set. Those same fixtures had already appeared across multiple feature films before landing on the new show, and they would go on to make additional appearances in later Star Trek productions after the next generation wrapped. For a series that presented itself as a bold leap into a shinier future, it was, quite literally, carrying pieces of the franchise's past along in the background of nearly every transporter scene. Ask any fan to hum the next generation's opening theme, and they'll likely nail it instantly. What most casual viewers don't realize is that very little of that theme was already beloved material instead, weaving together pieces from two different eras of the franchise rather than introducing something entirely new. The result became one of the most recognizable pieces of television music of its era, even though almost none of it was original to the show it represents. Given how futuristic Star Trek's technology always looked on screen, it's easy to assume the transporter effect involved early computer graphics. It didn't. The shimmering, sparkling dissolve that accompanied every Energize moment was created the old-fashioned way, using water, light, and household chemistry rather than any form of digital animation. The effects team would fill a clear container with water and add fine glitter or metallic particles to create the shimmer. To generate a more dynamic, bubbling texture, they sometimes dropped in effervescent antacid tablets, producing a rising stream of small bubbles through the illuminated liquid. The mixture was then filmed against a black background under bright lighting, and that footage was layered over shots of actors standing still on the transporter pad before stepping out of frame for the empty set plate. Editors combined the layers in post-production, adding vertical light streaks to complete the effect. It wasn't until Star Trek Voyager, years later, that the transporter effect made the full jump to computer-generated imagery, meaning a jar of glitter and some fizzing tablets carried the franchise's most famous piece of technology for years longer than most viewers would ever guess. Longtime fans, and even the people who made the show, tend to agree that Season 1 of The Next Generation is its roughest stretch, and the reasons went well beyond ordinary growing pains. Roddenberry had a firm philosophy for how the Enterprise crew should behave. In his vision of the 24th century, humanity had evolved past petty conflict, which meant he wanted to minimize friction and argument between the main characters. The idea was admirable in theory, but it created serious problems for the writers. Drama depends on tension, and when every disagreement had to resolve calmly and diplomatically, many early scripts felt flat, with episodes sometimes playing more like extended committee meetings than adventure television. Compounding the difficulty, a Roddenberry associate with substantial informal influence over scripts would frequently send approved drafts back for unauthorized rewrites, contributing to significant turnover among the writing staff during the first season. As Roddenberry's health declined over the ensuing years, producers Rick Berman and Michael Piller gradually took on more of the show's day-to-day creative direction, and the series is widely considered to have improved once it was allowed more honest interpersonal conflict among its characters. One of the show's most beloved recurring characters was born out of a scheduling problem rather than a grand creative vision. The pilot episode, Encounter at Farpoint, was originally built entirely around the mystery of a strange alien station. That story alone didn't fill the 2-hour runtime Paramount wanted for the premiere, so Roddenberry added a second plotline, an immensely powerful, mischievous being who puts humanity itself on trial for its past. That character was Q. The result was a premiere that essentially ran two parallel stories rather than one unified narrative, with Q periodically reappearing to threaten the crew before vanishing again. Actor John Delancey was reportedly cast on the recommendation of a Roddenberry associate after being spotted on a daytime soap opera. What began as a way to pad out a 2-hour pilot became one of the franchise's most enduring recurring roles. Q went on to appear across multiple seasons and eventually returned to close out the series finale, putting humanity on trial one final time, just as he had at the very start. Most actors wait for an offer. Whoopi Goldberg made the calls herself. As a child in the 1960s, she had watched Nichelle Nichols play Lieutenant Uhura on the original series and found it deeply meaningful to see a black woman treated as an equal on the bridge of a starship, at a time when few other shows offered anything comparable. By the time The Next Generation was casting, Goldberg was an established, Oscar-nominated film star with no professional need to join a syndicated television series, and yet she reached out to the production directly, expressing interest in a role. Initially, the producers were skeptical that the calls were genuine. It reportedly took an assist from LeVar Burton, already cast as Geordie LaForge and a personal friend of Goldberg's, to confirm to the production that her interest was real. When she eventually sat down with the producers, she made clear that she wasn't chasing a big role or a paycheck. She wanted to be part of a franchise that had shaped her worldview as a child. The result was the character of Guinan, a listener and confidant who existed outside the ship's normal chain of command. Goldberg reportedly took a reduced rate to play the role, treating it less as a job and more as a personal thank you to the franchise, and she would return to the character decades later in Star Trek: Picard. Patrick Stewart went into The Next Generation convinced it wouldn't last. In 1987, he was an established classical stage actor with a respected theater career in England, and American syndicated science fiction wasn't part of his professional plan. When the offer for a multi-season contract came in, his agent's pitch was less about long-term prospects and more about a practical calculation. The show would likely be canceled quickly, so he could collect a paycheck and return home once it ended. Taking that advice to heart, Stewart moved into a modest furnished apartment in Los Angeles and left much of his belongings packed, expecting the cancellation call at any point. Season 1 ended without that call. So did Season 2. By roughly the third season, ratings had climbed enough that the prospect of quick cancellation had essentially disappeared, and Stewart has since described settling into the reality that the show and the character were there to stay. What began as an actor hedging his bets against a short-term gig turned into 7 seasons for feature films and eventually a return to the role decades later in Star Trek: Picard. The episode Datalore introduced one of the series' most unsettling recurring antagonists, but the character didn't start out that way. In early drafts, the second android built by Dr. Ninian Sung was conceived as a female counterpart, intended primarily as a potential romantic interest for Data, a way of exploring whether an android could experience genuine emotional connection. Brent Spiner reportedly felt the concept played it too safe and pushed for something with more edge. An identical android with Data's exact appearance, but an entirely different personality underneath. One defined by resentment, arrogance, and manipulation rather than curiosity. That pitch led to the creation of Lore, Data's darker double, giving Spiner the opportunity to play 2 sharply contrasting characters within a single episode and demonstrate his range early in the show's run. The romantic companion concept never made it to screen, but the villain who replaced her became a recurring thread across the series for years afterward. The 5th season episode, A Matter of Time, introduced Berlinghoff Rasmussen, a fast-talking, self-described historian from the future whose true motives turn out to be far less noble than advertised. The role was written with Robin Williams specifically in mind, banking on his ability to talk circles around the bridge crew while keeping the character's real intentions a mystery until late in the episode. Williams reportedly wanted the part, but scheduling made it impossible. He was deep into production on Hook, Steven Spielberg's big-budget take on Peter Pan, a physically demanding shoot with a packed schedule, and taking on additional work wasn't realistic at the time. With the script already finished and production moving forward, Matt Frewer, best known for playing the glitching television personality Max Headroom, stepped into the role instead. Frewer's performance gave the episode the off-kilter, slippery energy it needed, and A Matter of Time is still remembered as one of the stronger standalone mystery episodes of the series, even though the part was written with an entirely different actor in mind. Under showrunner Michael Piller, The Next Generation did something almost unheard of in Hollywood. It opened its script submission process to the general public. Aspiring writers with no agent and no industry connections could submit a script along with a signed release form, and the production committed to actually reading them. The response was enormous, with the show reportedly receiving thousands of unsolicited scripts annually at its peak. Piller staffed a small team of dedicated readers whose sole job was to review submissions and provide feedback, rather than letting the pile go unread. The policy paid off directly at least once in a major way. Yesterday's Enterprise, widely regarded as one of the finest episodes the show ever produced, originated from that open submission process. The policy continued into the following decade, feeding material into later Star Trek series as well, before eventually being discontinued in the early 2000s over legal liability concerns. For more than a decade, though, the franchise practiced something close to the inclusive future it depicted on screen, giving outsiders with no connections a genuine shot at contributing to the show. Between the second and third seasons, actor Wil Wheaton had the opportunity to appear in Volmont, a film directed by Milos Forman, the filmmaker behind One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Amadeus. It was the kind of opportunity that could meaningfully shift a young actor's career, but the film's shooting schedule overlapped with the Next Generation's production by roughly a week. Wheaton asked for flexibility around the conflicting days. According to accounts from those involved, word came back through his agent that his character, Wesley Crusher, was essential to an upcoming episode and that the production could not accommodate his absence. Wheaton turned down the film role to stay with the show, and the part in Volmont went to another young actor instead. Not long afterward, the episode in question was reportedly rewritten in a way that removed the material Wesley had supposedly been needed for. Wheaton has spoken about how difficult it was to process giving up a significant film opportunity under those circumstances. He remained with the series through season 3 before departing as a series regular, with Wesley Crusher written off to attend Starfleet Academy. At the end of the first season, Gates McFadden was let go from the production. The circumstances involved friction with a showrunner at the time, who reportedly had concerns about her performance and little patience for her questions about how her character was being written, particularly her frustration that Dr. Crusher's material tended to skew toward emotional support scenes, while other characters handled the technical and command decisions. According to accounts from the production, the disagreement escalated into an ultimatum, and McFadden was the one who left. Season 2 introduced Dr. Catherine Pulaski in her place, played by Diana Muldaur, a character deliberately modeled in part on the gruff, skeptical energy of Dr. McCoy from the original series. Muldaur delivered a distinct performance, but the character never fully connected with the audience in the way the producers had hoped, and she did not return for a third season. By that point, the showrunner responsible for McFadden's departure was also gone from the production. With the ship's medical bay effectively vacant and viewer mail reportedly requesting McFadden's return, Patrick Stewart personally reached out to her, and producer Rick Berman ultimately brought her back. Gates McFadden returned as Dr. Beverly Crusher for the third season and remained with the show through its conclusion, playing a version of the character with considerably more agency and narrative weight than she had been given in the first season. Taken together, these 15 stories paint a picture of a production that looked serene and confident on screen while running on improvisation, recycled parts, and no small amount of internal conflict behind the camera. A captain nearly lost to a hairpiece. A Klingon with nowhere to sit. Scripts pulled out of a decade-old filing cabinet. A transporter effect built from glitter